Aaron Miller's chilling secret unraveled when police discovered he had been living in silence beside his mother, Patricia Miller's rotting corpse, a crime that shocked their quiet town and exposed the darkness lurking inside a son's twisted mind. The small town of Brooksville rarely made the news. It was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked. Children played outside until dusk, and neighbors waved to one another across quiet, tree-lined streets. That calm was shattered in the summer of 2017 when a foul smell began to spread through Oak Ridge Lane. At first, residents assumed it was trash that had been left to rot in the summer heat. A few thought perhaps an animal had died somewhere nearby. But as the days turned into weeks, the odor grew unbearable, thick enough to force people indoors and stir whispers about the one house at the end of the lane, the weathered home of Patricia Miller and her son, Aaron. Patricia was known in town as a friendly woman who had worked as a nurse for years before retiring. She often chatted with neighbors in her garden or brought baked goods to church gatherings, but lately, no one had seen her. The once neatly trimmed lawn outside her home had grown wild, and the mail was piling up at the door. While Patricia's absence was concerning, it was her son's presence that kept the neighbors uneasy. Aaron was in his late 20s but had never seemed to settle into life. He rarely spoke to anyone and was often seen shuffling between the front porch and the driveway at odd hours. He didn't hold a job, and most people knew he still depended on his mother for money and support. In the weeks leading up to the strange smell, Aaron had been spotted walking to the store in the early mornings, buying small bags of groceries and hurrying back into the house without making eye contact with anyone. Though his behavior wasn't new, it became far more unsettling when Patricia vanished from sight. Friends began to ask questions. Why hadn't she shown up for church? Why had her phone gone unanswered for so long? A few even knocked on the front door, but no one ever came to answer. Eventually, the smell grew too strong to ignore. It seemed to seep from the very walls of the Miller home, carrying with it a sense of dread that settled over the neighborhood. Finally, one worried neighbor called the police, reporting both the odor and Patricia's disappearance. When officers arrived, they approached the door expecting to find a medical emergency or perhaps even a neglected animal left inside. What they discovered instead would unearth a crime that would haunt Brooksville for years, forever changing the way its residents looked at the quiet house at the end of Oak Ridge Lane. The officers who arrived at the Miller residence on Oak Ridge Lane were immediately struck by the overpowering stench that seeped through the cracks of the old wooden door. They knocked several times, but no one answered. The neighbors who had gathered across the street watched in tense silence as the police pried the door open and stepped inside. What awaited them was far worse than any of them had imagined. The air inside was heavy and suffocating, thick with the unmistakable scent of death. The living room was dim, curtains drawn tight, leaving the space in perpetual darkness. Dishes with half-eaten meals sat on the coffee table, and the floor was littered with empty bottles and crumpled wrappers. It was clear the house had not been cared for in weeks, yet there was a strange sense of routine still present, as if someone had been living there all along. The deeper the officers ventured into the house, the worse the smell became. Their flashlights cut through the gloom, revealing layers of dust and signs of decay. Finally, in a back bedroom, they found what they had dreaded. On the bed lay the body of Patricia Miller, covered loosely with a blanket, as though someone had tried unsuccessfully to hide the reality of what had happened. Her body was badly decomposed, confirming that she had been dead for quite some time. The sight was disturbing enough, but what shocked the officers even more was that they were not alone. Sitting quietly in a chair beside the bed was Aaron Miller. His expression was blank, his eyes fixed, as if he had been waiting for this very moment. He made no attempt to flee, no effort to explain himself. Instead, he remained unnervingly calm as the police surrounded him. The silence in the room was almost unbearable, broken only by the muffled sounds of radios crackling from the officers' belts. Aaron appeared detached from the chaos unfolding around him, as though the presence of his mother's body had become something ordinary in his daily life. The officers quickly restrained him, but the questions racing through their minds were endless. How long had he been living in the house like this? Why hadn't he reported his mother's death? And most importantly, had he played a role in causing it? As Patricia's body was carefully removed from the house, neighbors whispered in disbelief, their worst fears confirmed. The quiet, rundown home at the edge of Oak Ridge Lane was no longer just a neighborhood mystery. It had become the center of a chilling crime scene, and the answers that lay ahead promised to reveal even darker truths. The days following Aaron Miller's arrest were filled with speculation as investigators worked tirelessly to piece together the truth of what had happened inside the decaying house. Patricia Miller had been well liked in Brooksville, and her sudden disappearance left many struggling to accept that she had been lying dead in her own home while her son continued living there as if nothing were wrong. Detectives began interviewing neighbors, friends, and relatives, slowly building a picture of the fractured relationship between mother and son. Patricia had long been the sole provider for Aaron, who, despite being nearly 30, had never held a steady job. He was known for his withdrawn nature, often avoiding eye contact and keeping to himself. But behind closed doors, their home life told a different story. Financial records uncovered by investigators revealed Patricia had been supporting Aaron almost entirely. She paid for his food, his clothes, and even his phone bills. Bank statements showed her accounts were strained, and friends later admitted that Patricia had confided in them about her growing frustration. She had told more than one person that she could not continue enabling her son's idleness and was planning to push him to find work or move out altogether. Detectives began to suspect that a confrontation over money and independence may have been the spark that ignited something deadly. Witnesses came forward with small but chilling details. One neighbor recalled hearing loud noises late at night just a few weeks earlier, heavy thuds followed by silence. Another remembered seeing Aaron walking to the store at odd hours, purchasing little more than frozen dinners and soda, his appearance increasingly disheveled. To investigators, it seemed that Patricia had likely died around the time those noises were reported, her son making only minimal efforts to keep up the appearance of normalcy afterward. Inside the home, evidence told its own story. The blinds had been kept shut, and the refrigerator contained only small amounts of food. Patricia's belongings were undisturbed, but the rest of the house showed signs of neglect, as though Aaron had abandoned any effort to maintain it. Most disturbing of all was the fact that Aaron had chosen to stay inside with his mother's decomposing body for weeks, venturing out only when absolutely necessary. Detectives began to realize they weren't just dealing with a homicide. They were unraveling the twisted psychology of a man who had not only killed, but also lived with the aftermath in chilling silence. The forensic results confirmed what investigators had already suspected. Patricia Miller's death was not natural. The medical examiner determined that she had suffered blunt force trauma to the head, injuries too severe to be accidental. Detectives returned to the Miller home to search for anything that could have been used as a weapon. Their careful sweep of the property eventually led them to the garage, where a blood-stained hammer was discovered tucked behind a stack of old paint cans. The find was the final piece of evidence linking Aaron directly to his mother's death. The question that loomed larger than ever was not just why he killed her, but how he managed to live with her body for weeks afterward without breaking down or confessing. Investigators reconstructed the days after Patricia's death, painting a picture of disturbing normalcy. Aaron had continued shopping for groceries, withdrawing money from his mother's bank account, and even mowing a small patch of the front yard to keep up appearances. While the rest of the house decayed around him, he had made calculated choices to avoid drawing suspicion. He kept the curtains drawn tight, avoided visitors, and spoke to no one. Experts brought in by prosecutors later explained that his behavior suggested a mix of denial and cold calculation. By refusing to acknowledge his mother's death publicly, Aaron managed to maintain control of the situation, no matter how horrifying it became inside those four walls. Crime scene photos revealed the state of the home, shocking even the most seasoned investigators. Mold had begun to spread on untouched plates of food. Trash was piled in corners. The bedroom where Patricia's body lay had become almost unrecognizable, with the bedding soaked through and the air thick with rot. Aaron's choice to remain in that environment demonstrated a chilling lack of remorse. Detectives theorized that he was motivated not only by a desire to conceal his crime, but also by financial dependence. With Patricia gone, her pension and savings were his only lifeline, and living alongside her decaying body became his twisted solution to survival. When questioned, Aaron offered no insight, responding with flat silence or vague statements that revealed little about his state of mind. His refusal to show emotion or admit guilt unnerved both officers and prosecutors alike. The evidence, however, spoke louder than words. To the investigators, it was clear Aaron had crossed a line that few could comprehend, committing not just murder, but enduring the grotesque aftermath with an unnerving stillness that made the crime all the more terrifying. The courtroom in Brooksville filled quickly when Aaron Miller's trial began, every seat taken by townspeople eager to understand how such a shocking crime could have unfolded in their quiet community. The prosecution laid out the evidence with precision. Starting with the financial strain between Patricia and her son, they argued that Patricia's decision to finally confront Aaron about his dependency had set off a violent chain of events. The hammer found in the garage was presented to the jury, alongside forensic reports linking it to the fatal injuries on Patricia's skull. Photographs of the home, dark and decayed, were shown on the screen, eliciting gasps from those in attendance. The jurors sat grimly as the prosecutor described how Aaron had chosen to live with his mother's body, pretending nothing had happened, while the smell of decomposition grew stronger each day. The defense attempted to shift the narrative, portraying Aaron as a troubled man suffering from mental illness. They argued he was overwhelmed by paranoia and incapable of fully processing his actions. Experts were called to discuss his withdrawn lifestyle and history of social isolation, suggesting he was detached from reality. But the prosecution countered that his behavior after the murder proved otherwise. His deliberate trips to buy groceries, his use of Patricia's bank cards, and his efforts to keep the house sealed from outsiders all pointed to awareness and planning, not confusion. Witnesses took the stand to describe the Patricia they knew, a caring woman who had dedicated her life to helping others. Neighbors spoke of her kindness, her laughter, and her devotion to the community, contrasting sharply with the image of her son sitting silently at the defense table. Each testimony painted the picture of a mother who had given everything she could, only to be repaid with violence. The emotional weight of these accounts pressed heavily on the jury. When the verdict was finally read, the courtroom held its breath. Aaron Miller was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The town of Brooksville was left to grapple with the unsettling truth. Behind the walls of an ordinary home, a nightmare had unfolded undetected for weeks. For many, the case became a haunting reminder that even the most familiar streets can hide the darkest secrets, and that evil sometimes grows not in strangers, but in the very people closest to us.